Is it normal to move 5 times in 4 years? Literally everything I owned started to have mold on it. And this guy is just standing in my doorway, completely naked. When I got there, I kind of regretted it immediately. I'm Leora in London, and I'm doing a series on renting in London. And in this video, I'm going to do a story time on why I moved 5 times in 4 years. You can watch the other videos in my series and feel free to leave me any questions in the comments that you might have. So I first moved to London in 2020 when there was a pandemic and I came as a student here. I decided to just rent through my university housing, which I decided to do because I was new to London. I didn't really understand the process of renting in London and it just seemed really easy. But when I got there, I kind of regretted it immediately. The place was really small and like it was a single bed. Yes, I did have my own bathroom, but it just felt like being an 18-year-old when at the time I was already like 26 and I was just like, this is not the place I want to live. But I'd signed a 1-year contract, so it was just kind of like, okay, it is what it is. One of the things that I hated the most about that place was how the building had a facade that was added on after the fact, but they didn't line up the facade's window cuttings with the windows themselves, so most of my view was just blocked by this stupid facade. And then on top of that, they put these like bird preventers on top, so it just looked like I was living in a jail cell, and it was quite small, so it very much had jail cell aesthetic. But because it was COVID at that time, I was actually able to break the contract a lot earlier, so I think within 5 months I was able to leave. I remember prior to realizing I could break the contract, I was walking around the neighborhood, which was Islington, and I came across this just beautiful street and being like, I wish I could live here. And then fast forward to when I was searching for a new place to live, I was looking for anywhere, but the place that I ended up finding and moving into was right on that street, so I thought that that was quite kismet. And it was this really beautiful room in a shared flat, and it had these gorgeous windows that were huge and let in so much natural light. And I shared it with 2 other people that I didn't really know, and there were no other communal spaces besides for a really small kitchen. So I just kind of lived in that room by myself and very much enjoyed living in Islington near the high street and all of that. And I ended up finishing my dissertation there, and it was just such a beautiful place to live. I love Islington. So what happened? Ultimately, there were 2 things that led to me leaving that flat. Number 1 was I'd gotten a pretty good deal on the place because it was COVID and a lot of people had left London at that time, so landlords had decreased the price of rent. But as people started to return to London after the lockdowns, then they decided to increase the rent quite a bit, so it started to be out of my budget. But the thing that ultimately really led me to leave was this one night, one of my flatmates was on the phone for hours with someone, and he was just like cursing at them and like every slur you could imagine he was saying. And finally I just knocked on his door and like told him he needed to stop, and he was like, oh, I'm so sorry, and was super apologetic. He goes in, the cursing stops, but then like I couldn't fall asleep because I was so angry. And then 2 hours later, I'm just in my bed still unable to fall asleep, and then all of a sudden my door opens and this guy is just standing in my doorway completely naked, and I was like, get out of my room. And the next day he had no recollection of it at all. I told him he needed to get a lock on my door, and I didn't want to talk to him again. And that was really the thing that made me contact my letting agency and tell them I needed to break my contract. And they dragged their feet for a while, being like, oh, we don't get in between disputes between our tenants. And I was like, this isn't a dispute. This is a situation that you guys are liable for if you don't do something about it. So ultimately, they did let me break the contract. They had originally wanted me to like search for someone to replace me. I fought back against that, and then they let me out of the contract. And at the same time, my friend in Peckham, who owns her flat, had a spare room that she was looking for someone to rent. So I was able to rent that for a really good deal. And that was honestly such an enjoyable experience to get to live with her, and we became like sisters, and it was just like nice to have someone who you have conversations with when you finish work, and you can talk to each other about anything and check in with each other. And I think I'd really been missing that over the year that I had been in London already, where I was just kind of on my own, especially during COVID. It was just nice to have someone who I was close to, who I got to see on a daily basis, and, you know, just make meals for each other and just explore our neighborhood together. But at the end of around a year of living in Peckham, she and I ended up having a falling out, which I think can sometimes be the downside of living with someone that you're friends with is, you know, if there's an issue within the friendship, then that also calls into issue the place that you live. And because she owns the flat, I ended up deciding to leave after around 5 weeks of this falling out situation, because for me it was like, I need to feel at home in my home. Shocker. I wasn't feeling comfortable, so I decided it was time to look for a new place. And I think that situation put me into a place where I actually wanted to be alone for a little bit. So at this point, because I lived in Islington, I'd lived in Peckham, I felt comfortable with living really anywhere in London, but I wanted to live somewhere that would still be relatively close to central London so I could get in and around everywhere. I ended up finding a studio flat in Belsize Park for a relatively good deal, considering Belsize Park is one of the most expensive places you could pick in London. But yeah, the rent itself was not too bad. But the reason for that was because the studio flat was in the basement. So there were a lot of pros to it, being I had my own space. It was just in the most beautiful neighborhood. It was a 5-minute walk from Hampstead Heath. I could go to the park all the time. I felt after that falling out that I had with my friend that it was a really great place for me to kind of recover from that. But there were also issues with the flat from the beginning. So they said that the flat had Wi-Fi, and it took around a month for the Wi-Fi to actually be up and running. There were also condensation issues within the flat. At certain points, the landlord even said that, well, you know, the condensation is caused by you breathing and cooking. And I was like, but I'm renting this place because I need a place to breathe and eat. After around 1.5 years of living there, I discovered a lot of mold under my bed, and I also started to discover mold on everything I owned. So all of my clothing, books that I had, literally everything I owned started to have mold on it. And my landlord was really just like unempathetic about the situation and was just like, well, you can move if you want to. And at first I was fighting against that. I was like, no, this is where I live. Like, you need to help solve this. But then at another point I was just like, maybe it's time to leave. So I took a few days off of work because not only did I need to search for a place to live, but I also needed to clean up all of my things and sort through everything and throw away things that I couldn't clean. Ended up having to throw away 50 books. I had to figure out all of these different techniques for cleaning mold off of things, and I had to get all of my clothing professionally cleaned because there was just mold on everything, and you know, you could smell the dampness on everything. It was honestly one of the hardest things I've ever dealt with. At this point, I can say, wow, I got through it, but at the time I was an actual mess. That led in my next search for the place that I'm at now to be really specific about what I was looking for and not shy away from looking at every nook and cranny in the places that I was seeing to make sure that I wasn't going to experience another mold issue or any other thing, and that if I was going to move this time, I really wanted to find a place that matched all of the criteria that I was looking for. And I took like notes after each visit and really did like debriefs with myself, and I took it very seriously because after moving so many times before in such a little amount of time. I was like, I am not going to do this again. I want to find a place that I can stay for a long amount of time. I really lucked out. I was able to find a place, but this was after looking at around 17 different places. I look back at all of the times that I moved, and for a certain amount of time I definitely felt like a failure, because is it normal to move 5 times in 4 years? Is there something wrong with me, or is this just gonna be what living in London is like? Am I gonna have to move every single year? And the truth is that it can be somewhat of a normal situation in London, but also to realize, you know, life happens and we cannot always control what causes you to have to leave. So yeah, that is why I have moved 5 times in the last 4 years in London. And the pros of that are that I could share all of my advice on how to find places to rent in London, what to look for. And as someone who loves to explore London, getting to live in all of these different neighborhoods has really given me that insider view of different neighborhoods. But that being said, I am tired of moving, and I'm excited to just get to settle for a little bit and stay put. And as much as I can feel upset about how many times I've had to move, I try to come back to that core feeling of you can move as many times as you need to in order to feel at home in your own place.